Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Unfortunately, we saw heavy rains Monday night and expect more today, especially in the Northeast Kingdom. For instance, St. J area saw over 8 inches, Island Pond 7 inches, and Morgan received over 6 inches, all within a very short period of time. This heavy rainfall combined with saturated soil left nowhere for the water to go, leading to more flooding and more damage to infrastructure, property, and businesses. Especially concerning is the number of homes that have been destroyed, a list that unfortunately seems to be growing by the week, adding to a housing crisis we've faced for years. In December, when communities across the state were flooded, many for the second time in just a few months, I called it a gut punch. 2 weeks ago, when communities getting hit for the second or third time in a year, I called it a kick in the teeth. Now with many families and business owners, not to mention municipal leaders, and road crews, utility workers, and more, seeing all the progress they've made since the flooding 3 weeks ago, being washed away again, it probably feels much worse than a punch or a kick. It's simply demoralizing. But we can't give up. We've got to stick together and fight back against the feeling of defeat. If there was ever a time when we needed our tight-knit communities to show up, it's now. If you haven't been impacted by this flooding, I encourage you to find a way to help. No deed is too small. Remember the Ackerman sisters from Hardwick, who set up a lemonade stand to help the House of Pizza open back up. That was a year ago. By the way, unfortunately, the House of Pizza was one of the businesses hit again 3 weeks ago. So check on your neighbors, near and far. Find a local organization that's coordinating cleanup, or register to volunteer at vermont.gov/volunteer. And if time is in short supply, but you have resources, make a donation to a local charitable organization, or the Red Cross, or the Vermont Community Foundation. And if you need help mucking out and cleaning up, please contact the Crisis Cleanup Hotline at 802-242-2054, and they'll connect you with volunteers. Turning back to the July 11th storm, FEMA was here inspecting damage last week to determine if we meet the threshold for public assistance or individual assistance. They concluded those inspections, and based on the data collected, we believe there's a strong case for a major disaster declaration. The next step is to send a formal request to the President that will include both individual and public assistance, and we expect to send that within the next couple of days. Again, this declaration request is for the July 11th storm and does not include this week's rain event. If you were impacted by flooding this week, it's important to contact 211 to report your damage, so we have an accurate picture of the impacts. I want to be clear, we don't know if we'll qualify for assistance from the most recent storm, but we won't know for sure until we have more data. So again, please contact 211 either online or phone to report any flood-related damage you might have. Finally, I want to again extend my appreciation to all Vermonters who are helping with response and recovery, from first responders to local road crews to volunteers stepping up to help their communities and neighbors. I know this may seem never-ending, but we'll get through it, continue to build back, increase our resiliency, and put ourselves in a better position to withstand future storms. With that, I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Morrison.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. The flash flooding and subsequent river flooding on July 30th was not an event that was predicted. It appears that a small storm cell stalled out over the Northeast Kingdom and dropped 4 to 8 inches of rain in areas such as Linden, Danville, St. Johnsbury, Morgan, and Island Pond. We moved quickly in the early morning hours to activate swiftwater rescue teams to respond to the most heavily impacted areas. Remarkably, we were able to mobilize 10 swiftwater teams. Those teams included 3 state urban search and rescue teams, as well as teams from Colchester, Stowe, Hartford, Littleton, New Hampshire, Linden, and 2 teams from Rescue Inc. in Brattleboro. In a matter of hours, 50 personnel responded and made 12 rescues and 15 evacuations. I want to take a moment to thank and to spotlight these teams, all volunteers, who answered the call in the middle of the night and responded without hesitation to what turned out to be raging floodwaters and dangerous conditions. Teams wrapped up rescue operations by 2 p.m. yesterday and spent the rest of the day searching damaged and destroyed buildings. The teams continued to perform evacuations in the hardest hit areas of Lindenville until 9 p.m. Many of those areas are still inaccessible today. Because inclement weather is predicted for today, we are in the process of staging swiftwater rescue assets in central and northeastern parts of the state. Additional teams are also available if conditions in other parts of Vermont need their services. We will discuss the weather in just a moment. I want to follow up on what the governor spoke of, and that is how to report new damage sustained on July 30th, 2024. Call 211 or report online to 211 and notify your insurance company. The 211 flood reporting page has been updated to allow users to select which event they are reporting for. You can still report damage from the July 9th, 10th, 11th, whichever day the damage happened to you event, or from the July 29th to 30th event. If you sustained damage 3 weeks ago and now have sustained additional damage, please complete a report for both dates. We have already received 105 residential damage reports and 6 reports of damage to businesses from this week's storm. We have to do the same process of information gathering and preliminary assessments to both public and private infrastructure to determine if any counties will qualify for assistance from FEMA for the events of July 30th. This generally takes several weeks to complete. We have very preliminary information indicating that 50 or more homes were destroyed or took on major damage in this event. Again, it is far too soon to give you reliable totals because many of the hardest hit areas are still inaccessible. Here's what's important right now. Debris and life safety. Homeowners and towns must prioritize the removal of debris. Woody debris, construction material, piled up rocks and sediment from culverts, stormwater systems, under bridges, and anywhere that will cause more damage if we get similar rains. The debris has got to get moved to let water flow and minimize damage from whatever comes next. If towns have identified areas of obstructive debris, please work through your emergency management director to notify the Emergency Operations Center. Let's talk about what might be next. The weather today. We expect to see widespread, slow-moving thunderstorms with high rainfall rates. This could produce isolated instances of flash flooding, particularly in areas that are already oversaturated. We also anticipate nuisance flooding in urban, low-lying, and poor drainage areas, especially if multiple storms track over the same area. The most likely time frame for these storms is from noon, right now, until 9 p.m. We expect to see sharp rises on rivers and streams, especially in areas that have seen recent rainfall and in areas of steep terrain. A flood watch is in effect for all of Vermont except Bennington and Windham counties until midnight tonight. Because the ground is so wet in some areas, there is an increased likelihood of landslides. We want everyone to pay attention to the weather this afternoon and take precautions as necessary. Looking ahead, very high heat is predicted for Thursday through Saturday. Heat indices of 95 or more are possible. Again, please stay in tune with the weather for the next few days and take precautions as appropriate. Now let's take a look back to the July 10th flooding. The status of our declaration for public and individual assistance, the governor already covered. In addition, we have received to date 2,425 reports to 211 of residential damage and 270 reports of damage to businesses. As the governor mentioned, we anticipate having the complete declaration request fully submitted to FEMA Region 1 by the end of the week. As soon as we hear anything about either public assistance or individual assistance, we will share that out. In the meantime, don't wait for FEMA to make repairs or to clean up. Just be sure to save receipts and document your repairs with photos and video. Lastly, a couple of thank yous. I'd like to thank all who have stepped up and volunteered to help neighbors in need. No matter how small or large your efforts have been, they matter. Whether it's help mucking out a basement or making a meal for someone, or driving across the state to rescue people from cars swept up in floodwaters, thank you. I'd also like to thank all of the helping organizations who have continued to support Vermont in flood recovery. There are too many to mention here, but please know that your hard work, along with your care and compassion, are greatly appreciated. And I'd like to thank all of the folks working in the State Emergency Operations Center structure. This includes hundreds of state employees, countless first responders, as well as local partners, nonprofit organizations, and many, many more. Your long hours and selfless dedication are seen and appreciated. I wish I could thank every one of you personally. And a hearty thank you to our partners in the media for sharing critical updates with the public, for asking questions on their behalf, and most importantly, for getting out into the hardest hit communities to chronicle their experiences and document the damage. We are all in this together, and supporting Vermonters is a goal we share. Lastly, I'd like to thank Lowe's for their generous donation of hundreds of muck-out kits. These kits have been tremendously helpful to those in need. With that, I'll turn things over to Secretary Flynn from the Agency of Transportation. He will be joining us remotely.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner Morrison. I'll be talking about state roads and bridges that are closed at this point in time. From the earlier floods 3 weeks ago, Route 5 in Barnet remains closed. We have reopened Route 102 in Maidstone, Vermont. From the storms of the 30th, we currently have 6 Vermont state roads closed. Excuse me. They are Route 2 in East St. Johnsbury, Route 5 in St. Johnsbury, Route 105 in Brighton, from Lakeshore Drive to Ethan Allen Drive, Route 111 in Morgan, and Route 111 at the intersection of Route 114. So basically Route 111 from 114 west to the public beach in Morgan is closed, as is also Route 114 in Eastburg due to a bridge which is severely compromised. From 3 weeks ago, one bridge is still damaged, and that is the one at Route 5 in Barnet. From this event this week, we have 3 bridges that are still compromised: Route 111 in Brighton, Route 114 in Eastburg, and Route 5 in St. Johnsbury. Railroad closures. The Connecticut River line, which only reopened last week from the earlier July storm, is now closed again from the St. Johnsbury rail yard north. AOT is also aware of damage on the privately owned Genesee and Wyoming rail line that enters Vermont in Norton and goes to Island Pond and east to Bloomfield into New Hampshire. There are reports of extensive damage from Island Pond east to Bloomfield. The Lamoille Valley Rail Trail from Beryl, the prior storm in the first part of July, 2 closures remain. Milepost 13.37 to 14.2. That's Danville Village to West Danville Park and Ride. And milepost 34.3 to 40.6 from the Hardwick Trailhead to the Wolcott Trailhead. From the event of this week, there is an additional closure on the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, and that is between St. Johnsbury and Marty's Store in Danville. There are multiple damaged sites in that section. Public transit. The J-Lyn route, which runs St. Johnsbury to Lyndonville and back, is not running due to the flooding and the shelter-in-place instructions. All other services in Vermont are running and navigating road closures as necessary. There are no impacts to aviation in Vermont. That concludes the report on the Vermont state-owned assets, and now I would turn it over to Secretary Moore.
Thank you, Secretary Flynn. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll start by sharing a summary of our agency's actions in response to the floods of July 11th, as well as work regarding yesterday's floods. And then I'll provide some helpful information for local officials who are working to meet the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. Yesterday's flooding in the Northeast Kingdom appears to have impacted 2 public drinking water systems. In St. Johnsbury, a lightning strike at the water treatment plant destroyed a controller that managed part of the water system operation. And we are currently working with the town to understand the long-term impacts of having it offline. The water main that broke during the July 10th and 11th flood was exposed again, but the line is intact. Currently, we do not believe there are service outages, meaning all users have water, and there are no boil water advisories for St. Johnsbury. However, town officials are asking users to exercise conservation and reduce water demands to the extent possible. In Lyndonville, several of the wells that serve the system were again inundated by floodwaters, as they were on July 10th, and so are not currently being used. The system will be cleaning, disinfecting, and flushing prior to collecting samples to return those wells to service. However, there is sufficient water from the unaffected well to serve residents in the interim. There is 1 boil water notice that remains in place from the July 10th storms, and that's for the Barnet School, and we expect that to be resolved by the end of next week. Similarly, 2 wastewater facilities were impacted by the flooding this week. A pump station and sewer main were damaged in St. Johnsbury, and the town has contractors on site working to implement temporary repairs. In addition, the access road to the Brighton wastewater facility was washed out, but reports we've received indicate it did not impact the treatment plant or sewer main. Brighton State Park is closed due to the flash flooding. There was flooding in and around the park, and interior park roads have washed out in places. All state parks that were affected by the July 10th flood have reopened, although 3 parks, Ricker Pond, Sayon Lodge, and Stillwater, still have reduced operations. The geology team has received 3 new reports of erosive and landslide events this week related to erosion of private roads and driveways in Bolton, Worcester, and Barnet. The team is also aware of several landslides associated with yesterday's storm in St. Johnsbury and plans to be on the ground there today. The Dam Safety Program has been reaching out to dam owners in the Northeast Kingdom and has not identified any critical concerns. We also hosted the Army Corps of Engineers on Monday and Tuesday this week, who toured several dam sites, including the flood control facilities in Eastbury, Wrightsville, and Waterbury. Since July 10th, the River Management Program has received 122 requests for technical assistance and has issued 25 emergency protective and next flood measure authorizations, with many more anticipated in the coming weeks and months. And we continue to urge Vermonters to contact us for assistance. If you visit the Agency of Natural Resources website, anr.vermont.gov/flood, there are links to all of these programs. Shifting gears to talk about the National Flood Insurance Program, also sometimes referred to as NFIP. As we await final word on the final federal disaster declarations for our hardest hit counties, there are other important ways that recovery in Vermont intersects with FEMA. And one of those is by being part of FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. There are steps that both communities and individuals that have been flooded should take. After a flood, property owners and renters who have been flooded, as Commissioner Morrison said, should do the necessary cleanup, drying out, and making temporary repairs needed for safety. You're also encouraged to talk with your town zoning administrator and ask for guidance on repairs for things that may need to be done in a certain way to maintain your eligibility for future flood insurance. Things like if you need to replace your utilities, elevating them, using flood-resistant materials that may not be damaged by future weather events. And as Commissioner Morrison said, it is important to take photos and keep receipts for labor and materials purchased. For communities that have had flooding, please be aware of your role in recovery under the National Flood Insurance Program. The NFIP is a voluntary program, but 92% of Vermont communities are part of the NFIP. When a community joins the NFIP, it makes federally backed flood insurance available for all residents, whether they are a renter or a property owner. When joining the NFIP, a community agrees to, at a minimum, regulate land development in the FEMA-mapped floodplain, sometimes referred to as the Special Flood Hazard Area. NFIP regulations are intended to reduce damage from flooding to new structures as they are built or existing structures as they are improved. After a flood, communities that participate in the NFIP need to assess flood damage on those properties within the Special Flood Hazard Area before repairs should begin. And although we know that in the immediate aftermath of a flood, it is an incredibly challenging time for many, these assessments help ensure that any repairs are more flood resilient and meet current NFIP standards, which in turn reduces the risk of future damage, loss of life and property, and ensures that federally backed flood insurance will remain available to residents. After a flood, communities participating in the NFIP will need to track and permit repairs for buildings in those special flood hazard areas. But it's important to understand that FEMA NFIP tracking is different than FEMA public assistance tracking. For communities that need help with the National Flood Insurance Program, there are floodplain managers at the Agency of Natural Resources who are available to help with post-flood permitting and substantial damage assessments. And for additional information, you can either call 802-490-6157 or go to anr.vermont.gov/flood and click on the River Damage and Restoration tab. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the governor.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. We'll now open it up to questions.
Governor, can you talk about the dynamic of the timing here? I mean, people were asleep when the worst of this came through. Like, can you just talk about what that dynamic is like in terms of differentiating from other floods?
Well, again, this one was a surprise to us in some respects. We monitor the weather. I think everyone does these days. And we knew that there were going to be storms, but didn't expect this one to this magnitude, this much volume would hover over the St. Johnsbury area. So it was a situation where I think I can ask Commissioner Morrison to speak more about this, but the Swiftwater Rescue Team was called in at 1:45. Mike Cannon received the call first and assembled the team, which was amazing. Volunteers to come to the aid of those in that community in such a short period of time. So everyone rallied and went to where the situation was unfolding, and I think we're able to satisfy or save lives in the response. So it's just one of those things where they train for that. They're very good at that, and they responded.
How do we?
Can I jump in there a little?
Sure.
Thanks. So the National Weather Service is always in touch with our watch officer at VEM if there's any abnormal weather situation, and the reality of life in Vermont is that most of those folks have the direct phone numbers of folks like Eric, myself, Mike Cannon. So I want to start by saying that there's always somebody watching the weather, right? All responses start at the local level, and it's because we have such dedicated volunteers and career people in these communities that are willing to go the minute they hear a word that the water's rising or there's power lines in the water or whatever it is. Somebody needs help. The local first responders go. And again, they very quickly feed information back to the SEOC, and we can then rally the teams, as the governor said. These are teams who are highly trained and have a variety of technical skills, but they're always ready. Their gear is always packed, their go bags are always packed, their rigs are ready to roll and fueled, and it's really just a matter of getting the call and saying, this is where you need to go. It is not any different than our state police special teams that are always ready to roll if a situation goes down. So it is a combination of local first responders getting eyes on an event and quickly escalating the call for resources that outstrip what they have at the local level, and then having these dedicated volunteers who are prepared and well-trained and getting them out the door quickly. So I would say that considering the onset was in the middle of the night and the initial hours of the operations took place in darkness, that we had pretty remarkable outcomes. And then the teams continued to work all day, clearing houses that were damaged or destroyed, trying to make sure there was nobody stuck there that couldn't be accounted for, and they'll be ready today for whatever the weather serves up. So.
Yeah, the last question for the governor too. I mean, last year's floods, we knew that they were coming for days. We were able to build up resources. with this one, I mean, how do we reassure Vermonters that we're prepared, or that we can fight an enemy, you know, that essentially we can't see them sometimes, you know, it came in out of nowhere. I mean, how do you reassure Vermonters?
I think our response in the last 2 years speaks for itself, whether it was known or an unknown event. We have saved lives and not had any big oopses where we couldn't cover an area. When we say we mobilized 10 Swiftwater teams, we have, one of those was out of state, by the way, so 9 in-state teams. We have 13 in-state teams that we can pick up the phone and call and send them where the need is. But obviously Littleton, New Hampshire was bordering that area and they jumped in the fray. We have similar arrangements all along our borders. So I am very confident that we can meet most of what Mother Nature doles out. However, I would never challenge her because there are always going to be worse and bigger events that we can't foresee. But that's why these teams and their deployment are scalable, and we keep them in a state of high readiness.
Just to put an exclamation point on, the local folks and local teams, local first responders, they are the ones who are immediately there. And then they call for assistance from that point on. But when you think about, we're probably not unique to other states, but I like to think we are at times, because we're always ready for an emergency in some respects. You think about local town crews that have to plow on a moment's notice when all of a sudden we get 12 inches of snow that wasn't expected, and that happens, or a rainstorm that wasn't expected, and ice when utility crews have to come out at a moment's notice. They do that day in and day out. This is part of their lives, and I think it makes Vermont even more special because, again, as Commissioner Morrison has said, I don't believe we've had any failures in that respect. They're always ready to go. If we have more opportunity, when we can see barrel coming up the coast, then that would help us. But in this case, we didn't know it was coming, and but we reacted in the same fashion.
What I guess would be your message to, say, municipality leaders? Because whether it was a few weeks ago or again now, they're talking about these damages that are double, triple, quadruple just their yearly budget. And I know there's the money that came out of the e-board yesterday, but besides taking out loans, they just have no idea how they're going to be able to keep fixing up their municipalities again.
Yeah, well, again, that's where FEMA comes in. That's where we come in. That's where the municipal bond bank comes in, and we're there to help in any way we have the opportunity to, but we have to know about it as well. So I might ask Doug Farnham, our Chief Recovery Officer, to expand on that further, but we know that towns and municipalities are tapped out, and that's why we went to the emergency board to ask for more money to assist, and we'll continue to do so.
Governor. So the $5 million from the e-board is a bridge measure to help us get through the short term. We do see, with especially the sequential events, if you take July, last December, June, now another event, we have some communities that could potentially have faced 4 separate events. So both from a human resources and a financial perspective, they're extremely strained. I think it will be incredibly important as we go into the legislative session that it's a serious part of the discussion how we adapt in the long run to supporting our communities. Right now, we are reliant on FEMA. We, of course, only have a limited amount of money in Vermont, and we need to spend it in a responsible and prudent manner. And adaptation, I think, is got to be near the top of that list. But I think as a helpful note, we did invest, in agreement with the legislature, over $41 million to put towards hazard mitigation. That's going to unlock another, over $80 million of federal funds. So we, over the course of the next couple of years, will be spending as a state over $100 million on hazard mitigation, reducing the risk to these towns. And that's where we're taking a statewide approach. We already have proposed projects of over $100 million, and we're confident that we will be able to move those forward working with FEMA. So I think reducing the risk in the long run is incredibly important, bridging the short-term capital, and I'm also working with the bond bank and the treasurer's office. The measures the treasurer took last year, some of those funds, if the FEMA has reimbursed a town, we're able to start to try to turn those around, increase lending, and the treasurer and the bond bank are evaluating whether or not they can perform another round of that lending. So that'll be more of the medium-term support for municipalities to have resources. But I do think adaptation in the long run, that needs to be on our radar. We of course have to survive the short term and get through the immediate response and public safety aspect of it. But and then we can talk in the session about adaptation.
Big picture, Governor, how worried are you about today's rain?
I think I get more apprehensive every storm. I think all of us are watching the weather because of what happened on Monday. Again, we didn't see that one coming, and it unfolded much differently than we thought. So with already saturated soils and already damaged infrastructure, this just adds insult to injury, and an inch or two of rain in a short period of time could be catastrophic for some. So yeah, we're watching everything happening, especially in those impacted areas from Monday.
It feels kind of trite to ask, but did you ever think it could get this bad this fast?
No, I in some respects, no. I mean, I think like a lot of us, when we had Irene, we thought that was going to be the 100-year storm. And then 10 years later, we had another equally impactful, devastating storm that did a lot of damage. And then to think 1 year later, we had another storm. So we're seeing more frequency, which is concerning, but it leads to, we need to mitigate further. We need to create more areas to store water. We need to harden some of the infrastructure to be sure that we protect people in the future.
Going back to municipal finances, I know you had expressed a worry that we might be triggering the 75% threshold instead of the 9/10 threshold. How concerned are you about successive storms that don't hit the max FEMA threshold, kind of wrecking both municipal finances, but also the state's ability to financially respond?
Yeah, I think, again, some of my concern is border counties that have received damage. We saw that a year ago. Addison didn't qualify, for instance, but they were just right across the border, so to speak, but their damages were significant. And FEMA wasn't there to help because of a process, a rule of some sort. I'd like to see more latitude with FEMA in those situations, because why does it matter which zip code you're in or what county you live in? If you receive damage, you should get some help. And I look at whether it's individual assistance or public assistance in the same way. Why is the magnitude different? Because someone living on Red Village Road in Lindenville received a lot of devastation. There was probably maybe 4 bridges on that route, many homes that are damaged beyond repair. And if we don't reach the threshold, the equation to get to individual assistance, what do they do? And what does the town do if we don't get, I believe we will, but if we didn't get to a public assistance threshold? So I think we, on the national level, and I know Senator Welch has talked about this, maybe a revamping of FEMA, taking a look. And it's not FEMA's fault. FEMA is just the creature of the Congress. They do what they're told. They're funded by Congress. and the rules around FEMA are dictated as well. And so the Congress has the means to change the way we look at things. And I think we're going to have to.
Governor, what's the status of the Army Corps of Engineers study on the, sort of the baseline study of Vermont's flood capacity?
I know I'll ask Secretary Moore to comment further, but when they came, they were here just yesterday, day before, and looked at some of our reservoirs to assess the capacity and whether we could do more, or whether they're adequate or not. So they've been in town, and I'm expecting them to continue to be a partner.
So we did have the opportunity yesterday to tour those 3 flood control facilities in central Vermont with a number of representatives from the Army Corps. I think it's important to reflect that building new large-scale flood control dams would be a difficult proposition in Vermont. So really what the focus of this conversation was about, are there options to increase flood protection using those existing facilities? So both, can we have a higher degree or any degree of operational control at Wrightsville and East Barre? As you may remember, both of those facilities are considered passive flood control facilities, so they have a certain amount of storage that they are capable of holding back. And then anything that exceeds that capacity, which fortunately has not happened since they were constructed, would head downstream. But we're looking at those opportunities. We also have a multi-million-dollar refurbishment project that is just getting underway, excuse me, at the Waterbury facility, which is our largest state-owned flood protection dam. We believe that work will stretch out into 2027 or 2028, but it is underway at this point with some initial activities in partnership with the Corps.
The Vermont Natural Resource Council has a small local dam removal program that says will reduce local flooding. I'm wondering if your administration is concerned that local dam removal, which if they stay, might sort of spread out the water locally, like what you've sort of been hoping would happen. Is there a concern that taking out these small dams would actually send more water rushing downstream?
No, the dams that the Vermont Natural Resources Council and other local watershed partners have been working to remove were never providing flood protection. And if left in place, frankly, oftentimes due to the state of disrepair many of those dams are in, actually present a flood hazard of their own, in that poorly maintained dams can fail catastrophically during a flood event and create a hazardous situation. And so it's been an intentional working group that's identified dams that are really don't have those other public purposes or public benefits, including things like recreation and hydropower generation in addition to flood protection. The dams that are being proposed for removal or have been removed at this point do not serve any public benefit, and we feel like the most resilient strategy is to take them out.
Question about debris removal. You mentioned that's a really big issue. I was in Moortown earlier this week, and they had some concerns about debris that's on private property in people's yards that either hasn't been cleaned up either from last year or this year or whenever, and that's of course a big concern for culverts and whatnot. So to what degree does the state or local municipalities have latitude or authority to compel people or require people to clean up their yards?
It's a major initiative to clean up all of the debris along our rivers and waterways. So we're contemplating what we can do at this point in time. I broached the subject with the emergency board yesterday that may be looking for funding in order to take care of some of that. The more I travel the state and look at the damage, the more concerned I am about the debris that I'm seeing, the woody debris in particular, some of the gravel deposits near the inlets of the culverts and under the bridges and so forth needs to be cleaned out sooner rather than later, so that it doesn't impact, so we don't have a flash flood, so we don't cause another problem that could have been prevented had we cleaned that out. But it's hard to catch up, and we need to take another look at how we do that, and I think we're going to ask for some funding, and then we'll develop a plan that we're working on now. I don't have any details for you, but I think it's going to be a major initiative in order to at least get the inlets and areas that we can see cleaned up.
I think Secretary Moore a few weeks ago said there was like 700-ish something miles of rivers and
7,000.
Oh, 7,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe.
What would it take? I mean, from a workforce perspective, a money perspective, a
Yeah.
time perspective?
We're working out those details right now. Again, we can't do everything, but there are some areas, again, that were damaged. You take Plainfield, go up the Brook Road, you can see a lot of tree damage, a lot of damage, down trees that are just waiting to be swept away by another flood. I was up in Lindenville yesterday, and there's a lot of debris in some of the inlets around some of the bridge structures and box culverts and so forth. And that's replicated throughout the state. So we start, prioritizing, looking for those areas that we can get to quicker. It'll take some specific equipment, I believe, to do that. Maybe, in some cases, a long-reach excavator with a thumb on it to pick that debris out. Some could be a feller buncher from a logger could do. Some winching some out with skidders and so forth. I think it's going to be a number of different strategies in order to accomplish this.
Can I just get a couple of details on the swiftwater rescues, like how many were conducted?
Over the period of about 2 a.m. till about 9 a.m., they did 12 rescues. So that's a live rescue off either a car or out of a house. And then they did 15 evacuations.
Thank you.
But that was just from
That was
2 days ago. Right?
just the night of the
Oh, no, the 30th. The night
Sorry,
of
the
the 30th.
Sorry.
Right, I was at
This week.
Right.
All right, we'll go to the phones. Juan, BT Digger. I'll go back to the room.
I have a PCB question, if the moment, I don't know if it's on fun, but I think it might be for Secretary Moore, maybe you, Governor. North Country Union Supervisor Union, North Country that is, recently installed PCB mitigation technology, airflow sensors, that type of thing to improve the PCB quality or situation there, but the conditions are actually getting worse. What can districts, and I know they're not the first, but what can districts do about this?
Well, we're working with North Country at this point in time. There are 80 contractors in there now trying to do remediation work, trying to get to 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, so that they can open back up for school. So there are remediation strategies. Don't know if they're going to work, but they're working feverishly to get that accomplished, and then they'll be tested after that. But Secretary Moore has been involved, as has Secretary Saunders and others, and Dr. Levine.
The governor's description is accurate. We are in the process of removing what have been identified as the most problematic building materials. It is oftentimes caulk that's used to seal around windows, also used to seal around air intake structures coming into the building, and then window glazing. And we are working sequentially through what are referred to as the B and C wings of North Country Union High School. Work has been completed in a portion of the C wing, and that's where testing will be conducted. In the coming days, we expect to have results in the second maybe week of August, and hope they will give an indication of the success of those efforts. We had done previous steps, as you alluded to, this winter with paints and special tapes that can encapsulate PCB-containing materials, but they proved not to reduce the concentrations of PCBs to a level in indoor air that we felt was environmentally health protective.
The PCB pause bill didn't make it over the finish line this year. Is the administration still of the mind that we should be continuing on with the testing, with funding, that type of thing?
Our focus right now is on the approximately 19 schools that we identified with the initial testing, where we found exceedances of our immediate action level. And in particular, 7 of those 19 schools had classroom spaces that showed these high levels of PCBs. Continue the dialogue with the legislature about how to complete the testing. To date, we've tested just about half of Vermont schools, but in the near term are really focused on remediating the problematic conditions we identified.
Just as a reminder, that was a legislative initiative to begin with, and but once we start, we follow the law. We want to make sure that we're keeping people safe, and once we encounter PCBs, we think we have an obligation to mediate that.
I wonder if you or Secretary Moore could expand on her statement that building a new flood control dam in Vermont is an unlikely proposition. I think is something that you said.
I'll let Secretary Moore. It's a very expensive, obviously, process. Where would you put it? There are other steps that could be taken for less money, I believe. But Secretary Moore.
I think the governor is exactly right. It would be a very expensive proposition and a very disruptive proposition. As you may be aware, there were small communities or individual farms that were flooded out by the construction of those 3 Central Vermont flood control facilities. And it was challenging in the 1930s to pursue that kind of strategy, and I think it would be even more challenging in modern times, given the additional development that's taken place in Vermont.
So what are those intermediate steps then? What are we looking at here?
The intermediate steps around improving.
If we don't have a new dam, what are some things we can do to control flooding long term?
Sure. So that part of it would be the increased level of operational control over the flood control facilities we do have, trying to store more water in those systems. As the governor has spoken to, I think another really important component of that is floodplain reconnection and restoration, looking for places where there isn't existing development or where there are flood-impacted properties that are pursuing FEMA buyouts, and taking those opportunities to create additional storage within the watershed, allowing the rivers to spread out in places where they won't do as much damage, and hopefully protect our downtowns and designated centers as a result.
Thank you all very much.